Welcome to Daily Wisdom, Walking the Path with the Buddha, a podcast shared by David Roylance. This podcast is dedicated to guiding you to completely eliminate the discontent mind and the suffering it causes by attaining enlightenment. Learn and practice the teachings of Gotama Buddha that will guide you to fully attain a peaceful, calm, serene, and content mind with joy. To support this podcast, visit patreon.com/support Buddha or visit buddhadailywisdom.com, where you will discover a full range of courses, retreats, and online learning resources to assist you on the path to enlightenment. Now, here's our teacher to share more.
Sawadee Kap. Hello and welcome to Daily Wisdom, Walking the Path with the Buddha. Today is our Pali Canon and English study group, and we're studying Volume 3, Chapters 61 through 70. These chapters are going to start with 3 individual discourses that are about preserving the truth, discovering the truth, and final arrival at the truth. We're going to be talking about these as we go through these 3 discourses, and then of course there's 7 more after that. But what I'd like to do before we even dive into these individual chapters is just share with you, and for those of you guys that are joining for the first time, how we do our Pali Canon and English study group. And then I'm going to share with you something about the truth that's going to help you to understand what the Buddha is talking about in all 3 of these discourses, because they're all connected together. The way that we do our Pali Canon English study group is I open up to any volunteers that you guys might be interested in reading. Those of you guys in Zoom, if you'd like to read, you can just electronically raise your hand, volunteer to read, and then after someone reads, I will share some teachings on that chapter and then open up to any and all questions that you guys have. If you have questions, you can put it into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or in Zoom you can electronically raise your hand and ask any and all questions that you like. So I'm going to share something with you guys about these first 3 discourses that we're going to be studying. They're titled Preserving Truth, Discovering Truth, and Final Arrival at the Truth. What the Buddha is talking about here, whenever he's describing the truth, is there's 2 aspects to his teachings that he's talking about with truth. The first one is pretty straightforward and one that you've probably learned before, where he's talking about ensuring that you speak the truth, because it's important that whenever you're talking, that you're always speaking the truth. If you're not speaking the truth, people are going to discover your lies, and you're going to see that it's very challenging to have healthy relationships and harmonious relationships, because people are going to discover those lies and they're not going to see you as being trustworthy, dependable, and reliable. So therefore your relationships will struggle. And then also, if you're telling a lot of lies, it's going to be very hard to keep it straight, and your mind's not going to be able to be peaceful and joyful because you're having to keep all your lies straight. So whenever you see the Buddha talking about the truth or speaking the truth, there's that aspect to it. But the thing that he's really going to be honing in on in these 3 discourses about preserving the truth, discovering the truth, and final arrival at the truth is what he's talking about is getting to wisdom, where you understand the truth of the natural laws of existence. He's going to give you 3 discourses that are going to walk you through how to get to final truth, how to get to wisdom where you can understand the natural laws of existence, because that's what you're doing on the path to enlightenment, is you're awakening to the wisdom of the natural laws. So he's going to give you guidance of how to ensure that you can preserve truth, meaning when you don't understand the truth, you don't fully understand it, you haven't really come to a final conclusion yet, he's going to teach you how to ensure that you preserve the truth and that you're not actually lying as you're talking about various things or you're discussing various things. Then he's going to talk to you and share with you about how to discover the truth, how to get to the understanding of these natural laws of existence. And mainly he's going to be talking about finding a teacher. And then he's going to talk about the final arrival at truth, how to know that you've actually discovered the truth about the natural laws of existence. So as I mentioned, we're going to start with this chapter 61. And if there's someone in Zoom who would like to volunteer to read this, you can read it, and then I'll walk you guys through and then open up to any and all questions that you guys might have. So if there's anyone in Zoom that would like to volunteer, okay, there's a few here. I'll just take them in order. So maybe Vibhav, you can do the first one, and then Samantha, you could do the second one.
Thank you. Chapter 61, the preservation of truth. But Master Gotama, in what way is there the preservation of truth? How does one preserve truth? We asked Master Gotama about the preservation of truth. If a person has confidence, Bharadwaja, he preserves truth when he says, my confidence is thus, but does not yet come to a definite conclusion. Only this is true, anything else is wrong. If a person approves of something, Bharadwaja, he preserves truth when he says, my approval of something is thus, but he does not yet come to the definite conclusion. Only this is true, anything else is wrong. If he receives an oral tradition, Bharadwaja, he preserves truth when he says, my receiving of the oral tradition is thus, but he does not yet come to the definite conclusion. Only this is true, anything else is wrong. If he reaches a conclusion based on reasoned reflection, Bharadwaja, he preserves truth when he says, my reaching of a conclusion based on reasoned reflection is thus, but he does not yet come to the definite conclusion. Only this is true, anything else is wrong. If he gains a reflective understanding of a view, he preserves truth when he says, my reflective understanding of view is thus, but he does not yet come to the definite conclusion. Only this is true, anything else is wrong. In this way, too, Bharadwaj, there is a preservation of truth. In this way, he preserves truth. In this way, we describe the preservation of truth. But as yet, there is no discovery of truth. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Vibhav. So here, what the Buddha is saying is that this individual has done a certain amount of intellectual learning, they've done a certain amount of reflection, but they haven't yet come to the final arrival of truth. They haven't actually discovered truth yet. So here, the way to preserve truth is that when you're talking about something that you haven't independently verified through learning, reflecting, and practicing, you can preserve truth by essentially saying, based on my experience, or things like, based on what I understand, or based on what I've noticed, right? Or based on my observation. These are kind of ways you can preface any kind of statement that you're going to say where you haven't come to a final conclusion or a definitive conclusion, and you don't know that this is true and everything else is what the Buddha is saying is wrong here. But essentially, this is true and these things are untrue. You haven't come to that yet, but you at least have some level of understanding based on your experiences. So if you get to that point with any particular aspect of your day-to-day life, your personal or professional relationships, or even the teachings of the Buddha themselves, you can preface anything that you're going to say with based on my experience, right? So this is the example I used at the temple today. So when I went to the temple today, I live on the east side of Chiang Mai, and all of Chiang Mai, a lot of it is actually flooded, particularly the east side of Chiang Mai is very flooded. For 1.5 kilometers, 2 kilometers away from the river, there's all this water. So on my way into the temple, I went up to a particular point and the roads were closed. You couldn't get through. So I had to turn, and then I went down this bigger road, and then I had to turn left towards the city. And as I went in towards the city, I met with more water. So I had to U-turn and come back out, and then I went down to another road, Hua Kiel Road, for those of you guys familiar with Chiang Mai. And then I went down that road, and then I ultimately got to the temple, and everything was dry and no problems. So if I got to the temple, and say at 12 o'clock in the afternoon, I said to somebody, based on my experience, the eastern part of Chiang Mai is flooded, right? And if I said this to them, and now say at 1 o'clock, they went out toward the east part of Chiang Mai and it wasn't flooded, I've actually preserved truth, because based on my experience of coming in this morning, the eastern part of Chiang Mai is flooded. I didn't speak in absolutes. I didn't say, the eastern part of Chiang Mai is flooded, because that's speaking in absolutes. And now when that person goes there at 1 o'clock and maybe the water has receded, they're like, hey, what the heck? David's lying. Like, there's no water around here. Everything's completely fine. But when you preface it with, based on my experience of coming in this morning at 7 a.m., the eastern part of Chiang Mai is flooded, I've now prefaced it in a way that preserves the truth. Right? I didn't speak in absolutes. So what you're going to see is that when someone's speaking in this way to preserve truth, you might say things like typically, or in most situations, or based on my experience, because if you understand the universal truth of impermanence, you can't really speak in absolutes. You can't say that all Thai people are peaceful and joyful. You can't say that, because there are some Thai people that aren't, right? You can't say all Chinese people are this way or all American people are that way, because right away, because the universal truth of impermanence, that's not actually true. You can't preserve truth when you speak in absolutes. So whenever you're speaking about anything in your personal professional life, you're going to need to be able to speak in ways that preserves the truth. And when it comes to the teachings of the Buddha, you'll need to do that as well. So sometimes people say, did the Buddha teach this? And I'll say, based on everything that I've seen in the Pali Canon, the Buddha has not taught that, right? Because out of the 45 volumes of books, I haven't read all of them, but I know all the teachings that I need to be able to guide people to enlightenment, because I know that mental state and I know how to achieve it and I know how to guide people to that enlightened mental state. But I haven't read everything that's in the Pali Canon. So if somebody shares something with me and they ask me, hey, did the Buddha teach this? I can preface it to preserve truth by saying, based on what I've seen in the Pali Canon, the Buddha never taught that. Right? And this will preserve the truth. Where if I say the Buddha never taught that, then that's speaking in absolutes. That's assuming that I've read every single aspect of the Pali Canon. So you can preserve truth this way. And then if somebody ever comes back to you and says, hold on a minute, you lied here. No, you didn't, because you preserve truth by prefacing it with these kinds of statements. So this is what the Buddha is teaching you here, is to have this ability to preserve truth when you haven't come to a definitive conclusion yet about any particular thing. Maybe you just have a reflective understanding, and you might need to preface some of the things that you talk about in this way so that you're not speaking in absolutes. Do you guys have any questions on this chapter? You can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom by putting it in the comments section, or you can raise your hand in Zoom and ask any questions that you like. Okay, it looks like Vibhav has a question. Go ahead, sir.
Yes, I was wondering when it says, can you just go down a little bit on the, yes, thank you. So what's the difference between reasoned reflection and reflective understanding?
So this is, very minute, very detailed. Essentially, the way that I teach it is, reflection. That when you're looking at a particular thing, you're reflecting on it, right? You're looking at it. You're trying to evaluate it. That's the way that I think about it. I don't really delineate between reasoned reflection and reflective understanding. It's just probably a level of deeper understanding, but I don't really delineate it that way. I just talk about reflection in general.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. You're welcome.
So I guess the question is, when somebody, if you have, is there something that you understand from the teaching, then can you say that based on my, reasoned reflection or reflective, or I reflected on this teaching or some situation, maybe it's not a teaching, but some situation, I've reflected on this, and based on my understanding after I've reflected on it, this is my understanding of the situation. Is that the way you would preface it?
Yeah, because what you're going to ultimately see that the Buddha gets to is the way that you get final arrival at truth is you got to practice the teachings. Just intellectually learning and reflecting, you only have a reflective understanding of the teachings at this point. But once you start practicing the teachings, then you come to final arrival at the truth. So here, what he's talking about in order to preserve the truth is when all you've done is maybe intellectually learned and you've reflected, right? Because here, that's what he's talking about when someone receives the oral tradition. In his time, that's the way you would learn. Today, we might say, if you've only read a book, or you've sat in a class and you've listened to a teacher, you have received this oral tradition. But then once you have received that oral tradition, then you need to reflect on what it is that's been shared with you. And now the Buddha is going to go into later in these other discourses about that you need to practice the teachings. And that's how you come to final conclusion of wisdom, is everything that I've been guiding you guys to do, which is learn, reflect, and practice. That's how you get to final arrival of the truth or wisdom. Here, this person, the way that he's describing it, hasn't yet practiced the teachings. That's why they haven't come to a final conclusion yet. And in order to preserve the truth, you need to speak about it in ways like, based on my reflections, based on my understanding, based on what I know about the teachings, or based on what I know about the water in Chiang Mai, the eastern part of Chiang Mai is flooded, right? This is the way for you to preserve the truth.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, let me just check one more time and see if we have any questions anywhere. All right, I'm not seeing anything. So let's go to Samantha for this next chapter, 62.
The discovery of truth. But in what way, Master Gautama, is the discovery of truth? In what way does one discover truth? We ask Master Gautama about the discovery of truth. Here, Bharadvaja, a monk may be living in dependence on some village or town. Then a householder or a householder's son goes to him and investigates him in regard to three kinds of states. In regard to states based on craving and greed, in regard to states based on anger and hatred, in regard to states based on ignorance and delusion. Are there in this, Venerable One, any states based on craving and greed such that, with his mind obsessed by those states, while not knowing he might say, I know, or while not seeing he might say, I see, or he might urge others to act in a way that would lead to their harm and discontentedness for a long time? As he investigates him, he comes to know there are no such states based on craving and greed in this Venerable One. The bodily behavior and the verbal behavior of this Venerable One are not those of one affected by craving and greed. And the teachings that this Venerable One teaches are profound, hard to see and hard to understand, peaceful and superb, unattainable by mere reasoning, subtle, to be experienced by the wise. These teachings cannot easily be taught by one affected by craving and greed. When he has investigated him and has seen that he is purified from states based on craving and greed, he next investigates him in regard to states based on anger and hate. Are there in this Venerable One any states based on anger, hate, such that, with his mind obsessed by these states, while not knowing, he might say, I know, or while not seeing, he might say, I see, or he might urge others to act in a way that would lead to their harm and discontentedness for a long time? As he investigates him, he comes to know there are no such states based on anger and hate in this Venerable One. The bodily behavior and the verbal behavior of this Venerable One are not those of one affected by anger and hate. And the teachings that this Venerable One teaches are profound, hard to see and hard to understand, peaceful and superb, unattainable by mere reasoning, subtle, to be experienced by the wise. These teachings cannot easily be taught by one affected by anger and hate. When he has investigated him and has seen that he is purified from states based on anger and hate, he next investigates him in regard to states based on ignorance and delusion. Are there in this Venerable One any states based on ignorance and delusion such that, with his mind obsessed by those states, while not knowing, he might say, I know, or while not seeing, he might say, I see, or he might urge others to act in a way that would lead to their harm and discontentedness for a long time? As he investigates him, he comes to know there are no such states based on ignorance and delusion in this Venerable One. The bodily behavior and the verbal behavior of this Venerable One are not those of one affected by ignorance and delusion. And the teaching that this Venerable One teaches are profound, hard to see and hard to understand, peaceful and superb, unattainable by mere reasoning, subtle, to be experienced by the wise. These teachings cannot easily be taught by one affected by ignorance and delusion. When he has investigated him, and he has seen that he is purified from states based on ignorance and delusion, then he states confidence in him, filled with confidence. He visits him and pays respect to him. Having paid respect to him, he gives ear. When he gives ear, he hears the teachings. Having heard the teachings, he memorizes them, and examines the meaning of the teachings he has memorized. When he examines their meaning, he gains a reflective understanding of those teachings. When he has gained a reflective understanding of those teachings, enthusiasm springs up. When enthusiasm has sprung up, he applies his will. Having applied his will, he investigates thoroughly. Having investigated thoroughly, he applies effort and energy through purposeful striving. Determined to apply effort and energy through striving, he realizes the ultimate truth and sees it by penetrating it with wisdom. In this way, Bharavaja, there is the discovery of truth. In this way, one discovers truth. In this way, we describe the discovery of truth. But as yet, there is no final arrival at truth.
Okay, thank you, Samantha. So what the Buddha is talking about here that is needed in order to discover the truth about these natural laws is that you're going to need a teacher. And he's guiding you in how to evaluate and how to decide who would be a wise teacher for you. He's saying, okay, when there's this individual who's essentially living on the dependency of some village or town, meaning they're living based on donations, that a householder or householder son investigates this individual. Essentially, you try to understand whether this individual has craving, anger, and ignorance. Those are the three poisons or the three unwholesome roots. If an individual doesn't have craving, anger, and ignorance, that means their mind is enlightened. But if there's any degree of craving, anger, and ignorance, what the Buddha is saying is it would be very difficult for that person to guide you to enlightenment, because if you haven't attained enlightenment for yourself, you wouldn't be able to guide other people to enlightenment. So I'll show you where he's saying this, right? So if you guys remember craving, anger, and ignorance from the three poisons or the three unwholesome roots or the three fires, the craving is the longing, yearning, the selfish desires, chasing after the objects of your affection. If you get what you want, you get those pleasant feelings. But if you don't get what you want, then this anger, hatred, and ill will arises. And that's where the mind becomes unskillful. And where this is all coming from is the ignorance or the unknowing of true reality, the lack of wisdom, the misunderstanding. So it's because of ignorance that craving and anger continues to exist. So the Buddha is saying that in order to receive the discovery of truth, where you can actually have the opportunity to discover the truth, you're going to need to learn with a teacher who doesn't have craving, anger, and ignorance. Because if they haven't been able to figure out how to eliminate craving, anger, and ignorance for themselves, how would they be able to guide you to eliminate that craving, anger, and ignorance? It's kind of like if you were going to learn how to drive a car, would you be interested in learning how to drive a car from someone who's been driving a car for 20 years and maybe has been teaching for the last 5 or 10 years? Or would you like to learn how to drive a car from someone who's never driven a car before? Right? So if you're interested in getting to enlightenment, you need to be able to learn from somebody who is either enlightened or very close to it. So the Buddha is giving you guidance on how to discern whether someone has craving, anger, or ignorance. Here he's saying, okay, when you look at somebody's mind, if they're obsessed with craving, desire, attachment, then one of the things you're going to see is that when they don't know something, they're going to say, I know, right? They're going to say, I know. Or when they don't see something, meaning they don't understand certain aspects of the natural laws, they're going to say, I see. And then they're also going to urge other people to act in ways that are harmful and that leads to their harm and their discontentedness, right? So this is what someone who has craving is going to do, that they're going to say, I know, when they really don't know. They're going to say, I see, when they really don't see. They really don't know the natural laws. And they're going to urge people to do harmful things that is going to lead to their harm and their discontentedness for a long time. But the Buddha is saying, when you look at somebody and you investigate this individual and you don't see that, and what you see instead is you see this bodily behavior and this verbal behavior that one is not affected by craving, desire, attachment. The way that you'll see somebody's bodily behavior and their verbal behavior is not affected by craving, desire, attachment is that if there's craving, desire, attachment in the mind, there's going to be this longing and yearning. There's going to be this chasing after things. You're going to see this very hurried approach that the person isn't able to just walk steady and calm and stable, that their bodily behavior is very hurried and very rushed. And same thing with their verbal behavior, that they're going to be speaking very fast, very rapidly. They're going to be jumping from topic to topic to topic to topic. But when you don't have craving, desire, attachment in your mind, you can just be calm and steady with your bodily behavior. You're not going to just be running and chasing after things. And your verbal behavior, you'll be focused and concentrated and clear in the way that you speak. So this is how you can observe someone's bodily behavior and verbal behavior. And you can see whether or not it's affected by craving or desire or this attachment. Because if somebody has craving, desire, attachment, it would be unwise for you to study with that person because they're not going to be able to lead you to enlightenment. So then as this person is speaking and they're sharing the teachings, what the Buddha is saying is that you should be able to see that their teachings are very profound, that they're challenging to understand, that these teachings lead to peacefulness, that they're superb, that these teachings are unattainable by mere reasoning. Like you can't just reason your way to understanding the teachings. There needs to be essentially this practice that you're going to see the Buddha's talking about. And then he says, these teachings cannot be easily taught by one affected by craving. Because if a teacher has craving, desire, attachment, they're not going to be able to teach these teachings very easily because they haven't fully cultivated their own mind. So for example, if a teacher has a craving, a desire for the students who come to their class, that everyone who comes has to stay. And when somebody leaves, if they get angry or upset or agitated or frustrated, they wouldn't be able to teach the teachings very easily because every time people are coming and going in and out of their classroom, they would get agitated and frustrated. That's just one small example. So they would get angry and irritated and annoyed in certain situations when the students are functioning in ways that they don't want them to function. So with craving, desire, attachment in the mind, a teacher wouldn't be able to easily guide students to enlightenment. And then the Buddha teaches the same thing related to anger or hatred, that once you've investigated to determine whether there's craving, desire, attachment in the mind, then you would like to further investigate whether there's anger or hatred. Because if you see anger and hatred in the mind, the Buddha is saying the same things are going to occur, that they're going to say, I know, when they really don't know. They're going to say, I see, even though they don't see. And then you're going to see that they might urge other people to do things that are going to lead to their own harm or their discontentedness. So when you see this, then you can investigate further. And it's the same thing that the Buddha talked about earlier, that when you come to know that there is no anger, hatred, and ill will in this person's mind, then you can also see that their bodily and their verbal conduct doesn't have any anger, hatred, and ill will. Because you can see when people are angry and they're frustrated and they're agitated. Because if you're around your teacher enough, you can be able to see how they function in various situations and whether they get angry or frustrated or agitated, right? And then again, the Buddha's talking about these other things here as well, like we talked about earlier. So the Buddha's saying it would not be easy to teach these teachings if your mind was affected by anger. And then ultimately he says the same thing about ignorance or the unknowing of true reality. Because the unknowing of true reality is that you don't understand the natural laws of existence. If someone didn't understand the natural laws of existence, they wouldn't be able to explain it to other people so that they can then understand it. So the Buddha is saying, okay, once you investigate someone based on craving, anger, and ignorance, remember, you're not judging them. You're not looking down on them. You're just trying to understand whether this person's mind has any craving, anger, and ignorance. And then when you investigate that, then the Buddha says, okay, having been purified by craving, anger, and ignorance, and you have confirmation that that is the case, then you place confidence in that individual. This is how you're going to discover truth, is that now that you've investigated and you have the thought that this person is enlightened, now you can have confidence in that person. Then he suggests that you pay this person respect through visiting this person, meaning showing up to classes, having personal guidance sessions, things like this, and now you pay respect to this person. And the reason why is because anybody who's teaching the teachings the way that the Buddha taught to teach them is they're not going to expect anything from you. They're not going to want anything from you. They're just here to help you. And if somebody's here to help you and they don't want anything from you, they haven't put price tags on their classes and their courses and retreats, they're just here to help you. And it would be wise to pay respect to this person. And that's what the Buddha is explaining. And then having paid respect to this person, then you give ear. What this means is that you listen with eager ears to the teachings because you have confidence that this person is enlightened. So now you're interested in hearing what it is that this person has to say about the teachings, that you eagerly listen to the teachings. Then when you hear the teachings, you've heard them, now you actually memorize them because you're going to need to internalize them to a certain degree. Yes, we have books and videos and podcasts and things like this, but you're going to need to memorize what the teachings are so you can actively practice them. Then you're going to need to examine those teachings, meaning investigate them closely. There's another thing where he talks about investigating them as well. So here he's talking about investigating what you've memorized. Then as you're doing that, you're going to then do this reflective understanding where you start reflecting on the teachings. And then after you've reflected on the teachings, you're going to start to see that they're somewhat true. You haven't practiced them yet, but you're starting to see through your reflection like, hey, these teachings are true. And that's where your enthusiasm springs up. It's like, wow, this is what I've been looking for. I've been curious about this, mind and why it's angry, why it's frustrated, what would be the wise way to speak in the world, what would be the best way to function in the world among other people. This enthusiasm can spring up in the mind because you're finally getting the truth of what it is that you need. Then your will to apply the teachings in your day-to-day life. And you further investigate the teachings more thoroughly. And as you're doing that, then there's this effort and energy that springs up in the mind where you're willing to apply your effort and energy to strive to practice the teachings. And now practicing the teachings, this is where you start to realize the ultimate truth and start to observe with wisdom what is the truth, because you've now gone from your intellectual learning, you've gone to the reflection to independently verify the teachings, and now you've gone to the practice and you're starting to integrate them in your life, and you start seeing the truth more and more, that the wisdom of these teachings, that they're actually true. And this is how you can then discover the truth. But you haven't come to final arrival at the truth yet. You're just discovering truth after truth after truth after truth about the various teachings that the Buddha shares. So it looks like Samantha has a question here. And if anyone else has a question, you can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or you can raise your hand in Zoom and ask any questions that you like. So if you'd like to go ahead, Samantha, you're welcome to.
Hi, thank you. I just have a general question about, part of it has to do with discovering the truth. A couple of years ago, when I first arrived in Chiang Mai and was really interested in diving into Buddhism more, I joined several Facebook pages, generally like the Buddhist way and things like that. And I found that a lot of the postings on there are people asking advice of other people, which I thought would be interesting for me. They might be going through similar questions or situations that I'm going through. But I found after starting to study with you that most of the answers that I see, almost instantly when I read them, I'm like, oh, that's not what Teacher David would say, or that's not, my understanding of things now that I've been learning with you. So my question is, should I remove myself from those groups because they don't really seem to be adding much, or is it actually a good exercise for me to see some of these questions and reflect on them and say, that doesn't seem like, a wise decision or a wise piece of advice that people are giving other people?
This is something that you'll need to come to on your own, Samantha. There's ways that I could share that it could be wise for you to continue to participate in those groups, or at least read what's going on in those groups. But it could also be wise for you to disconnect from those groups too. You got to look at this and see, like, is it occupying a lot of your time? Is it taking away from your ability to study and learn and meditate? Is it confusing you when you're reading it? Is it creating any confusion in the mind? If you're seeing any of those things, that would be reason to walk away from the group. If you're looking at the content in the group and it's actually helping you to confirm what it is that you already understand, and you're learning through the words of the Buddha with the resources that I share, and it's more solidifying the teachings in your mind for you, then maybe it would be wise for you to, continue to read those posts and things like that. So that's something that you'll have to look at and see, what is it that's occurring here.
Okay. Yeah, I haven't found it to be confusing. It seems to me quite obvious sometimes what the answer is, and then when I read it, it takes me back to when I was first learning Buddhism in the West, how different it is from what you teach. So, and I don't spend much time on it. I just look on it every now and then, but it doesn't seem to be, it seems to be more solidifying, as you were saying, but it's also not terribly helpful, I don't think. So I think I probably will just disengage from it. But anyway, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. And since you brought this up, because of impermanence, you'll see a lot of different people sharing a lot of different things about the teachings of the Buddha. And because very few people study with the original words of the Buddha, that's why you see such a disparity out there of what people are actually sharing. And that's why I encourage students to not believe anything that you see out there in the world, and don't believe me either, but get into the Pali Canon through this program like this and others, and really investigate the teachings so you know the truth for yourself. And it sounds like that's the case for you, Samantha, that when you're reading these posts that you already know the truth, and that's where you can discern that, yeah, this isn't accurate here, what people are actually sharing. Because a lot of the Facebook groups that are out there, there's just a lot of arguing and fighting and festering. And this is what the Buddha actually said was going to be occurring at this particular time in his teachings. He essentially said this. So those things go on in various Facebook groups. Our Facebook group, you don't see that, right? Because people are learning and practicing the teachings. So you don't see people arguing and festering and fighting, because it's being orchestrated in such a way that those things don't occur. And the people who are participating, they're learning about right intention and right speech and right action and all these other things, where in these other groups, they're not learning those things. So you got a lot of kind of wild animals running around, and you're going to kind of get a lot of discontentedness going on in those groups, and a lot of argumentative speech that's happening, unfortunately. So yeah, each person has to decide for themselves what they would like to do in those situations.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, Vibhav, you have a question?
Yes, I guess I had a kind of follow-up question to Samantha. So a lot of people, I guess they are learning from either lineage, people have been doing this for a while, or they found some other teachers, like people who just started teaching the last 20, 30, 40 years, and people have learned in the West and they started teaching here. They do, it seems to me, and where I was reading some of the same posts as Samantha was, some different groups, it seems to me they do get some help. Like if you go to, say, a Vipassana center or meditation center, you do get some help from where you were. Like you're very highly discontent, and now you are less discontent because you're doing some meditation, and you have some, maybe a little bit of the teaching that has been done. And then people believe that is, as you said, sometimes people would think like, maybe they get to the first jhana or the second jhana, they would think, or even somewhere better than, even closer to that point, they would think that their mind is much better, and this is better than what they were, and they was like, okay, this is good enough for me, kind of situation, right? But they've not really discovered the truth, because there's a lot more teachings to be learned. So how will those people be able to understand that there is more to learn and more to discover than what they have discovered till now?
Yeah, this is what I've been teaching, and what the Buddha teaches is that because of that ignorance, that unknowing of true reality, the mind stays stuck in this constant cycle of discontentedness over and over. What I see in a lot of situations, particularly in the West, is people actually don't have any teachers, that they don't understand the very first aspect of the path to enlightenment is that they need a teacher in order to be able to get to enlightenment. There's only that one type of individual that could get to enlightenment by themselves without the help of teachers and guides, and that would be an actual Buddha. So the vast majority of people that I see in Facebook, and this is one of the reasons why there's so much festering and argumentative speech, is because they don't have a teacher. They're not receiving any guidance. They're maybe just reading a few books. They're maybe going to a couple of retreats here and there. They don't really have a dedicated teacher that they're actively learning from, and they're actively on the path. It's very rare that I'll find somebody or run across somebody that is like that. So those individuals are just going to continue to stay stuck in this constant cycle of discontentedness and this constant cycle of rebirth over and over and over again until they come to understand that there's more than just meditation and that they're going to need a teacher. So that's why I teach the way that I do. And slowly but surely, the people that make their way to learning with me, they gradually learn that they understand why they haven't been able to make a lot of real progress is because they've just kind of been out there without a teacher and without a guide. So you're going to see those kinds of things, and those individuals are only going to be able to get help when they choose to reach out to get help from somebody, because you can't force somebody or control someone. And the challenge is for some people is that there's a certain amount of ego in the mind, and the ego is that arrogance and pride and boastfulness. And in order to get that ego to get the help that it needs, the ego needs to decide that it's going to be humble enough to reach out to somebody to get help. But the ego is typically in there so arrogant and so boastful that it won't actually become humble enough to actually get the help that it needs. So the ego is one of the most self-sabotaging things that there is, because the ego thinks, I'm so great, I'm so wonderful, look at me, I'm so great. But because that ego's up so high, they actually need somebody. They actually need the help to learn that that ego is up so high so that it will come down and get eliminated and it can get the help that it needs. But because the ego is so high, it won't actually get the help that it needs. And we talk about this nowadays through mental illness. Someone might call this person in the extreme, they might call them a narcissist, right? This is a term that a lot of people talk about when someone's ego is up really high, that this individual isn't typically going to get the help that they need because the mind has so much ego. Well, there's different degrees of this. Narcissist is the really high extreme of a high ego, but even throttling that back some, it can actually hinder you from getting to the point where you even have the opportunity to learn. So like in a situation with me teaching at the temple, there are situations where people learn about the classes that I'm teaching. They wake up in the morning to come to the class. They take a shower, they brush their teeth, they have breakfast, they come to the temple, they take off their shoes, they get a meditation cushion, they come in, they sit down, they meditate, and then now their ego rises up, right, in the actual class. And they're sitting there in the temple, and they've even made the decision to actually come and learn. And even still in that situation where someone's chosen to come learn, sometimes the ego can be too high to actually even be able to learn at that point. So the ego needs to be reduced enough that it's willing to get the help that it needs. Otherwise, it's just going to keep staying stuck in this continuous discontentedness. And it's only the individual person that can choose to eliminate that and reduce it enough that they can actually get the help that they need.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, let me see if we have any questions anywhere else. All right, so I'm not seeing any questions anywhere. So let's go to the next one, chapter 63. This is the final arrival at truth. Is there someone who would like to read this? Okay, it looks like Leo. Go ahead, sir.
But in what way, the final arrival at truth? But in what way, Master Gotama, is there the final arrival at truth? In what way does one finally arrive at truth? We asked Master Gotama about the final arrival at truth. The final arrival at truth, Bharadvaja, lies in the repetition, development, and cultivation of those same things. In this way, Bharadvaja, there is the final arrival at truth, wisdom. In this way, one finally arrives at truth. In this way, we describe the final arrival at truth.
Okay, thank you, Leo. So what the Buddha is saying here is the way to get to final arrival at truth is that you need to repetitively do, develop, and cultivate those same things. What he's talking about is these things up here. That here in this discourse, when he's talking about these things, you need to continually do these things over and over and over and over again. That you place confidence in a teacher, that you pay respect to this person, that you give ear, listen to the teachings, you hear the teachings, you memorize the teachings, you examine them, you now gain this reflective understanding of the teachings through your reflection and independent verification. The enthusiasm springs up in the mind. You start applying your will to be able to actively investigate the teachings more thoroughly. You then apply effort and energy to strive to attain the things that you haven't attained yet. You start practicing the teachings closer and closer and closer. And that's what's going to ultimately get you to truth. So that's going to get you to truth after truth after truth after truth. Because each time you're studying with your teacher, each time you're reflecting on the teachings, each time you're practicing the teachings, it should be leading to more and more and more wisdom. So by repetitively doing this over and over and over and over again, that's where you're going to get to the final arrival at truth. The final arrival at truth is that the mind fully understands the wisdom of the path to enlightenment. And now you will know that you've acquired what's called final knowledge. The Buddha's not talking about this here, but in other discourses, you'll hear him talk about final knowledge. What final knowledge is that you fully understand the path to enlightenment, fully, inside and out, backwards, forwards, left, right. You don't have to look at a book to describe the path to enlightenment. You have it right here in your mind because you've actually practiced it so thoroughly. And that's how you get to the final arrival at truth, or final knowledge, and the mind will be completely liberated, that there won't be any discontent feelings at that point. And you'll have full confidence that you understand the path to enlightenment, because you'll have the mental state of enlightenment as your confirmation. That when it's been 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, you haven't experienced any discontentedness whatsoever, you'll know that you finally arrived at truth, that you have final knowledge, because there is no longer any discontentedness in the mind. So any questions on this chapter? Okay, I'm not seeing any questions anywhere. So I'm going to move to the next one, which is chapter 64. Is there someone who would like to read this? Okay, Leo, go ahead, sir.
Thank you. 5 future dangers in the way for consideration. Monks, there are these 5 future dangers in the way of reflection on which the diligent, dedicated, determined monk first gone hoped to live, just to attain the unattained, to master the unmastered, to realize the unrealized. What 5? First, take the case of a monk who reflects thus. I am now young, a mere youth, black-haired and endowed with the beauty of youth, in the prime of life, but there will come a time when old age shall touch this body, and when grown old and overcome by age, it is not easy to attend to the Buddha's teachings. It is not easy to retreat to the forest wilderness. Before that comes to me, unwished for, undesirable, disagreeable condition comes upon me. Let me in advance arouse energy for the attainment of the unattained, to master the unmastered, to realize the unrealized. Then, when I am in that condition, I will reside at ease, even thought I am old. This is the first future danger to consider, which is enough for a monk to reside diligent, dedicated, determined, for the attainment of the unattained. Second, again, he reflects, I have health and well-being, a good digestion which is neither too cold nor too heated, but moderate and suitable for striving. But there will come a time when sickness shall touch this body, and sick and ill, it is not easy to attend to the Buddha's teachings. It is not easy to retreat to the forest wilderness. Before that comes to me, unwished for, undesirable, disagreeable condition comes upon me, let me in advance arouse energy for the attainment of the unattained, to master the unmastered, realize the unrealized. Then, when I am in that condition, I will reside at ease, even thought I am sick. This is the second future danger to consider, which is enough for a monk to reside diligent, dedicated, determined, for the attainment of the unattained. Third, again, he reflects, food is not plentiful. There has been a good harvest, and food is easy to get, and it is easy to keep oneself going by gathering. But there will come a time when there is famine, but harvest and difficulty in getting food. when it will be hard to keep oneself going by gathering. And in a time of famine, people will move to where there is plentiful food, and there one will dwell in living conditions that are congested and crowded. It is not easy to attend to the Buddha's teachings. It is not easy to retreat to the forest wilderness. If all that comes to me, unwished for, undesirable, disagreeable condition comes upon me, let me in advance arouse energy for the attainment of the unattained, to master the unmastered, to realize the unrealized. Then when I'm in that condition, I will reside at ease, even though food is not plentiful. It is the third future danger to consider, which is enough for a monk to reside diligent, dedicated, determined for the attainment of the unattained. Fourth, again, he reflects, now men reside in friendly fellowship together, blending like milk and water without disputes, but viewing each other with eyes of affection. But there will come a time of fear of robbers, and the people of the countryside will mount their vehicles and flee. Fear-stricken men will move away to where there is safety, and there one will dwell in living conditions that are congested, crowded. It is not easy to attend to the Buddha's teachings. It is not easy to retreat to the forest wilderness. Before that comes to me, unwished for, undesirable, disagreeable condition comes upon me, let me in advance arouse energy for the attainment of the unattained, to master the unmastered, to realize the unrealized. Then when I'm in that condition, I will reside at ease, even in the time of fear. This is the fourth future danger to consider, which is enough for a monk to reside, diligent, dedicated, determined, for the attainment of the unattained. Fifth, moreover, the monk reflects thus, now the community lives in friendly fellowship, together, finding comfort in one teaching. But the time will come when the community will be fractured. And when that happens, it is not easy to attend to the Buddha's teachings. It is not easy to retreat to the forest wilderness. Before that comes to me, unwished for, undesirable, disagreeable condition comes upon me, let me in advance arouse energy for the attainment of the unattained, to master the unmastered, to realize the unrealized. Then when I'm in that condition, I will reside at ease, even though the community is fractured. This is the fifth future danger to consider, which is enough for a monk to reside diligent, dedicated, determined, for the attainment of the unattained. Monks, there are these 5 future dangers in the way to consider, which the diligent, dedicated, determined monk, forest gone, ought to live just to attain the unattained, to master the unmastered, realize the unrealized.
Okay, thank you, sir. So what the Buddha is talking about with these 5 dangers is 5 things that stand in your way of being diligent, dedicated, and determined. There's kind of these 5 things that might dissuade you from actually learning and practicing the teachings now to be able to get to enlightenment. The first one is that the mind might think, oh, now I'm young, I'm youthful, I'm in the prime of my life. And this might actually, get to a point where that kind of dissuades you from actually learning and practicing the teachings, because you might be like, not now, I'm not going to actually learn the teachings. But what he's saying is that because of impermanence, there's going to come a time when you become old, and it's harder at that point to be able to learn and practice the teachings because the mind has been conditioned. It doesn't mean that there's a bad time to learn and practice the teachings. Even if you run across these teachings when you're 70 years old, it's wise to start learning and practicing then if you've never learned them in the past. But if you're young, you might kind of postpone the learning and development on the path because you're thinking, I'm young, I got plenty of time. I don't need to get to the learning of the path to enlightenment right now. But the Buddha is saying, no, but at some point you're going to be old. And at that point, it's going to be a lot harder for you to train your mind to get to enlightenment. So he's saying before this comes, before this happens, where you become advanced in age, instead use this as a motivating factor. Use this as a factor that you understand that, no, I'm young now. I'm going to get old at some point in the future. And at that point, it's going to be more difficult to learn and practice. So let me be diligent, dedicated, and determined now instead of postponing this or having complacency. Then the next one, he talks about this health and well-being. Right now, somebody might be like, oh, I'm really healthy. I'm feeling really well. No need to learn and practice the teachings now. I'll wait until later, another time. Well, later on, there's going to be sickness. As you age, the body's going to get sick. And at that point, it's going to be a lot harder to learn and practice the teachings when the body's sick. So the Buddha is saying, because if you're wise and you're smart and you know this, that at some point in the future, you're going to become sick, while you're healthy, use that to your advantage so that then you can reside diligent, dedicated, and determined. And then he talks about this situation where food is plentiful. Again, when food is plentiful, maybe people sit back, they put up their feet, they become complacent, and they're like, food is really plentiful, no need to actually learn and practice the teachings now, right? Maybe somebody has a lot of wealth, maybe they have a lot of possessions, maybe they have a lot of things, right? And they're like, no big deal, life's pretty great. But what the Buddha is saying is at some point, because of impermanence, this is all going to change. And there's not going to be that food, or there's not going to be that wealth and that plethora of material possessions. And if you know that, then what the Buddha is saying is, okay, while you have this plentiful food and food is easy to come by, reside diligent, dedicated, and determined, because now you can easily get food and you can easily learn and practice the teachings. And then the fourth one he's talking about is that when you reside in a community of people that are friendly and there's lots of fellowship, and now people aren't actually arguing and upset, you might be like, life is really great, no need to learn those teachings now. But the Buddha is saying in the future, there's going to be difficulties where people aren't able to be as friendly and warm and loving anymore. And now you're going to live in situations where there's disgruntledness and anger and hostility and bitterness. So the Buddha is saying, since you know that if now you're living in a pretty friendly environment, he's saying, okay, use this to your advantage to remain diligent, dedicated, and determined to attain the unattained, meaning to make continuous progress on the path to enlightenment. And then he talks about the community of practitioners who are actually learning and practicing these teachings, that there's might be comfort in the fact that, that there's this group of people that are learning and practicing these teachings actively. But in the future, this community may fracture, right? And this is exactly what happened, that during the lifetime of the Buddha, the community of ordained practitioners were quite close. But then after he died, it actually fractured and people split apart. So if you were kind of resting on your laurels, so to speak, where you were taking it for granted that the community was very close and maybe you weren't practicing the teachings as closely, then later when the community fractures, it would be a lot harder for you because there's not as many people that understand the teachings so closely. So the Buddha is saying, okay, if you're in a community of people that are learning and practicing the teachings closely, be diligent, dedicated, and determined now because you have this to your advantage. So don't allow these to become dangers, but instead use it to your advantage if you're experiencing any of these things so that you can continue to reside diligent, dedicated, and determined. So any questions on this chapter? You can put it into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom. Okay, it looks like Leo has a question. Go ahead, sir.
I just wanted to ask, why the teachings fractured, or how you said it, fractured so much? Because there were so many enlightened people after his death. Why it was not able for them, that there may be some charismatic enlightened people who could also get so many students together? And that's just my question. Do you have an idea why this?
Sure. The same reason why all difficulties and struggles are occurring is craving, anger, and ignorance, right? There was a core group of enlightened beings that stuck together. And for 500 years after the death of the Buddha, there were people that were regularly getting to enlightenment for the first 500 years after his death. But there were certain people in the outer fringes weren't practicing the teachings very well, and the community fractured, right? And then also during the lifetime of the Buddha, he didn't distinguish anybody as his successor, that he didn't kind of leave the community to a particular student or anybody like that, that it was just like, okay, the Buddha's dead now. There was no leader, essentially. There was nobody that was distinguished as an individual leader who was kind of an heir to the throne, so to speak. Not that there was a throne or anything like that, but you understand the analogy with a king. So in the case of the Buddha, he didn't have that. So the core group of people stuck together, and they were able to help more and more and more people get to enlightenment for the first 500 years after the death of the Buddha. But the people in the outer fringes, they were all fracturing. And this is why you get Mahayana Buddhism and Zen Buddhism and Vajrayana Buddhism and all these other things, because all these splintering and fracturing. And then people started changing and modifying his teachings, which is very unwise because it's going to cause harm for yourself and other people to do that.
So it was maybe a small mistake of him that he didn't choose someone who is his how you say, someone who keeps going, sitting on the Buddha throne.
Yeah, the successor, right? Yeah, so I don't see it as a mistake. I just see it as this was the sequence of events that occurred. Perhaps the Buddha felt like there wasn't anybody that he was willing to say, okay, you now be the leader. Instead, maybe the way that he approached it is he said, okay, if there's going to be a leader, that person will stand up and people will acknowledge them as the leader. So instead of the Buddha acknowledging someone as the leader, then he thought, okay, maybe the community should choose that for themselves. So he, for whatever reason, chose not to select somebody. And the only thing that I can think of is that perhaps he felt like, let the community choose for themselves who they would like to have lead them after he dies, instead of him distinguishing somebody to be a particular leader. So whatever he did it intentionally that way. And he knew his teachings were going to degrade over time. That's something that he knew during his lifetime. But I don't see it as a mistake. I just see it as he had certain reasons why he chose not to do this. And this is what we can look at his life and we can see that he didn't distinguish somebody. And this did lead to, in my opinion, the degrading of his teachings, but this is something that he intentionally did, that he wouldn't have just haphazardly not done this.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Okay, Vibhav, you have a question?
Yes, I guess a similar question or follow-up to what Leo was asking. So there is, even if he had chosen a successor, I mean, there's no guarantee that the teaching would not have degraded, right? There's just impermanence would have still led to the degradation of the teachings at some point of time. I mean, this happens even with either you have I guess, the analogy is they're just kingdoms themselves. Maybe they're not the right analogy because people choose heirs, either the offspring or the somebody takes over the kingdom because they're just better suited to run, or they get taken over by somebody because they're the better suited to run the kingdom. So even is from your perspective, is choosing a way to kind of guard that degradation, or do you think that even though there is a successor there, eventually because of impermanence, the teachings will get degraded?
We don't know that to be true because it didn't happen, and we can't speculate. We can't say that even if the Buddha did choose somebody, they would have still degraded. We can't actually say that because that would be speculation. But the fact is that people nowadays, we can look at what happened from the lifetime of the Buddha and afterwards, and we can see that, yes, the teachings did degrade, right, for the reasons that we're talking about here. And now a community like this, where we're working to restore the teachings through people learning and actively practicing them, this is what's going to restore the teachings back into the world. And because the world has lacked these teachings for so long, and we've got into such difficulties in the world as we're experiencing right now, then a community of people like us and people after us can decide like, hey, we're never going to let these teachings degrade ever again, because that's not something that we're interested in occurring again, because we saw what happened from the lifetime of the Buddha until now. The teachings did degrade, and then it was so much effort to be able to restore them back into the world. Let's not ever allow that to happen again. So we can, from this point forward, get to the point where they will never degrade again. And that would be a best thing for all of us to stay focused on, is by learning and practicing for yourself. You're actually helping to restore the teachings back into the world, because the very best thing to restore the teachings back into the world is for many, 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 many people to get to enlightenment. If we can have countless beings in this community getting to enlightenment, that will effectively restore the teachings back into the world, and then it will just kind of ripple out into the world, and we can maintain this by more and more and more people getting to enlightenment.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. You're welcome. Okay, let me see if we have any questions anywhere else. All right, I'm not seeing anything anywhere else. Is there anyone who would like to read this next one? This next one is chapter 65. This one is titled When the Mind Becomes Sluggish. I just saw a bunch of hands. I'll pick the first one, which was Pat, and those other guys that you guys would like to volunteer in the future, you definitely can.
When the mind becomes sluggish. On an occasion, monks, when the mind becomes sluggish, it is untimely to develop the enlightenment factor of tranquility, the enlightenment factor of concentration, and the enlightenment factor of equanimity. For what reason? Because the mind is sluggish, monks, and it is difficult to arouse it with those things. Suppose, monks, a man wants to make a small fire flare up. If he throws wet grass, wet cow dung, and wet timber into it, sprays it with water, and scatters soil over it, would he be able to make that small fire flare up? No, venerable sir. So too, monks, on an occasion when the mind becomes sluggish, it is untimely to develop the enlightenment factor of tranquility, the enlightenment factor of concentration, and the enlightenment factor of equanimity. For what reason? Because the mind is sluggish, monks, it is difficult to arouse it with those things. On an occasion, monks, when the mind becomes sluggish, it is timely to develop the enlightenment factor of investigation, the enlightenment factor of energy, and the enlightenment factor of joy. For what reason? Because the mind is sluggish, monks, it is easy to arouse it with those things. Suppose, monks, a man wants to make a small fire flare up. If he throws dry grass, dry cow dung, and dry timber into it, blows on it, and does not scatter soil over it, would he be able to make that small fire flare up? Yes, venerable sir. So too, monks, on an occasion, it is timely to develop the enlightenment factor of investigation, the enlightenment factor of energy, and the enlightenment factor of joy. For what reason? Because the mind is sluggish, monks, it is easy to arouse it with those things.
Okay, thank you, Pat. So this is starting to help you understand the 7 factors of enlightenment. I introduce students to this in some of the other programs that we have, where there's mindfulness, which is the first factor. Then there's investigation, energy, and joy. Then there's tranquility, concentration, and equanimity. What these are is this is a tool to fine-tune the mind in order to bring it up out of a sluggish condition or to bring it down out of an excited condition. It's kind of a tool to fine-tune the mind. Sometimes based on the name and the way that this is referred to, is that people think the 7 factors of enlightenment are to determine whether you are enlightened or you aren't enlightened. But what the 7 factors of enlightenment are for is that you're able to lift the mind up out of this sluggish or complacent condition, this lethargic condition. That's what the Buddha is talking about here, that when the mind is sluggish, you're not interested in bringing in tranquility, concentration, and equanimity, because that's going to calm the mind down. That's what you bring in when the mind is excited. Instead, if the mind is sluggish, you would like to bring in the investigation, energy, and joy. What investigation is where you're actually investigating the teachings. That's what's going to bring the mind out of that sluggish condition, because that's the last thing that the mind wants to do when it's experiencing complacency and sluggishness. It wants to push away the classes, push away the books, push away the meditation, push away these things. It doesn't want to talk to the teacher, maybe. This is what the mind does. So when the mind's sluggish and lethargic and complacent, and you see that with your mindfulness, then you'd like to bring in the investigation, where you do read books, where you do attend classes and courses and retreats, where you maybe talk to your teacher and things like this. And as you're investigating the teachings, that's where the energy is going to spring up in the mind. Their mind's going to have this enthusiasm, this ambition, this motivation. That's what the enlightenment factor of energy is, where you have a willingness to do something, right? That's going to spring up in the mind. And then as that's springing up in the mind, then you're going to notice this joy, this unconditioned gladness coming into the mind. And that's how you lift the mind out of this sluggish state. And the Buddha uses this analogy of a fire, that if a fire was kind of going out, right, and it's kind of a small fire, and you would like it to flare up, you would like to put this dry grass, dry cow dung, this dry timber, and blow on it, and that's going to flare up the fire and make it kind of flare up. And that's what you're trying to do when the mind is sluggish. You're trying to flare it up and try to bring this brightness and this radiance to it. And that's what the Buddha is describing to you here. And then we have another discourse which is going to describe just the opposite. But any questions on this one first? Okay, Vibhav, go ahead, sir.
Yeah, I think I asked in a Facebook post as well, but people didn't see it. I was wondering if there is like specific techniques to do the like in factor of like develop the factor of energy or factor of joy, because I was feeling sluggish like maybe a week or two ago, and I was trying to figure out how to develop the energy or the joy, and was trying to like tell myself like, you know, this is, you're feeling joyful and you're feeling energetic. But it was like on a temporary, working very kind of temporarily. So I was wondering if there are any other techniques that you suggest that would kind of help in this situation when the mind is feeling sluggish.
Yeah, the way that these enlightenment factors work is one feeds into the other and feeds into the other. It's kind of like this domino effect, this chain reaction. So in order to get energy and joy in the mind, you need to actually practice the enlightenment factor of investigation. And then because the mind is sluggish and it doesn't want to investigate the teachings, you're going to need to apply right effort, where you apply the effort to pick up the books and come to the classes and train the mind. So when you start practicing the enlightenment factor of investigation, that's going to spring up the energy and spring up the joy. And this is the way that you actually cultivate these.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, looks like Leo has a question. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, just also the same question. It's like, how would you do it? Like jump up and just go to the and maybe walk around, or bring up this energy if the mind is sluggish? Can you go a bit deeper maybe?
Yeah, I'll show you. Come on, wake up, let's go, come on, let's pick up this book, let's go, man, come on, let's make it happen, right? You got to apply that energy, you got to apply the effort to wake up the mind, right? So slap the face a little bit if you need to, like, come on, snap out of it. You can't lay around and be lazy all day. Let's go, come on, you got to brighten up the mind, right? So you got to apply the effort to go and do that. Right? So the mind's going to just want to be sluggish and dull because the mind's on that side. And if it's not on that side, it's going to be on the other side where it's chasing and chasing and chasing, and it's so excited and it's bouncing off the walls. The mind's going to swing back and forth like this because it doesn't want to be in the middle. It doesn't know where the middle is. So what the Buddha is teaching you is how to bring the mind up and lift it up out of that sluggish condition to the middle. And what you're going to see next is how to bring it down out of that excitement. And the more you spend time in the middle, the more that the mind will stay there. So if you allow the mind to be complacent, even for a few hours or a few days or a few weeks, it's a lot harder to bring it out of that complacency. That's why the mindfulness is so important, that you practice mindfulness. Because if you can catch your complacency quickly, it'll be a lot easier to bring your mind out of it. If you allow your mind to sit in complacency for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks, you haven't been meditating, you haven't been reading the books, it's a lot harder to bring the mind out of that. You haven't been attending classes and stuff like that, it's a lot harder to bring your mind out of that. So that's why you just kind of gradually chip away at this little by little, and you're gradually attending classes. But if ever there's a time where you see your mind starting to even look towards complacency, you don't allow it to do that, and you lift it up and bring it to the middle. The more the mind gets used to being in the middle, it'll just reside there. That's the analogy you've heard me share many times, where you have the piece of wood and you have the steel rod and you grind it back and forth. That's what you'd like to do, is whenever you see that mind sluggish, you lift it up so it doesn't stay down in that sluggish condition, because it's hard to get it out. And then when you see the mind in that excited, overactive state, you'd like to calm that down, which is what we're going to see next. And now with the mind being in the middle more and more, it'll just reside there more and more readily for longer and longer periods of time. So your mindfulness is your guard. That's what's guarding the mind, that anytime you see the mind veering towards sluggishness or excitedness, you can rein that in and bring it into the middle. And it's a right effort that's going to allow you to do that. There's no mystical, magical thing. There's no trick. There's no like special switch or special button that you can press. It's the mind applying the Eightfold Path of right effort to arise the energy and the effort to be able to do it.
And just if I'm, for example, on the computer the whole day, that would be also sluggish, right? Because it would be wise to read and make meditation, but instead I want to play this nice game. Or is it more that I'm lazy, I like to chill, lie down? Is this sluggishness? I'm not sure.
You need to have a balanced life, right? You need to do a little bit of all the different things that you need to do. So if you like to play a game every once in a while, go for it. But if you're playing it hours and hours and hours on end, and you're not attending to the various things that you need to attend to, this is not wise, right? So if you follow kind of what I've provided as guidance, you'd be reading about 10 to 20 minutes a day. Just a short little bit, just 10 to 20 minutes a day you're reading, right? And then you're actually practicing meditation, 2 or 3 sessions per day. But then the other parts of your day, you're going to need to go to work. You're going to need to take care of the body with food and clothing and shelter, medical care. You're going to need to take showers, brush your teeth, take care of your hygiene. You're going to probably need to have some conversations with friends or family, people like that. So you're going to need to kind of balance out your life. So if you do see your mind, playing a lot of video games for hours upon hours, and you're not attending to these other things, then this is problematic, right? So for example, like myself, you guys know that I was just in Mexico and I was traveling and teaching. So I was teaching a lot. I was teaching for 2 weeks, right? It was like back to back to back. And not only was I teaching in Mexico, I was teaching online too, my normal classes that I was teaching. But there was a couple times in the evening where maybe I'd spend an hour or hour and 30 minutes, 2 hours even maybe, watching some YouTube videos or playing some video games online. Play this game, Leo Splendor. I play Splendor online, things like this. So you can do these kinds of things, but you would like to be sure you've got other stuff in your life, like reading the book, meditating, taking care of your work. And when you get all these things taken care of and you've got some extra time to be able to now spend to do these other things, there's no harm in you doing that because you've got your life well balanced. Mm-hmm. Yep, you're welcome. Okay, I'm not seeing any other questions anywhere. So let's go to the next one. This next one is the exact opposite of the one we just read. So this is chapter 66. So someone who would like to read this?
I can read.
Okay. Vibhav. Yeah, Keely just volunteered. Let's go with Keely. Go ahead, ma'am.
When the mind becomes excited, on an occasion, monks, when the mind becomes excited, it is untimely to develop the enlightenment factor for investigation, the enlightenment factor of energy, and the enlightenment factor of joy. For what reason? Because the mind is excited, monks, and it is difficult to calm it down with those things. Suppose, monks, a man wants to extinguish a great bonfire. If he throws dry grass, dry cow dung, and dry timber into it, blows on it, and does not scatter soil over it, would he be able to extinguish that great bonfire? No, Venerable Sir. So too, monks, on an occasion, when the mind becomes excited, it is untimely to develop the enlightenment factor of investigation, the enlightenment factor of energy, and the enlightenment factor of joy. For what reason? Because the mind is excited, monks, and it is difficult to calm it down with those things. On an occasion, monks, when the mind becomes excited, it is timely to develop the enlightenment factor of tranquility, the enlightenment factor of concentration, and the enlightenment factor of equanimity. For what reason? Because the mind is excited, monks, and it is easy to calm it down with those things. Suppose, monks, a man wants to extinguish a great bonfire. If he throws wet grass, wet cow dung, and wet timber into it, sprays it with water, and scatters soil over it, would he be able to extinguish that great bonfire? Yes, Venerable Sir. So too, monks, on an occasion when the mind becomes excited, it is timely to develop the enlightenment factor of tranquility, the enlightenment factor of concentration, and the enlightenment factor of equanimity. For what reason? Because the mind is excited, monks, and it is easy to calm it down with those things. But mindfulness, monks, I say, is always useful. That's all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Keely. Here we've got the exact opposite analogy, right? You've got this raging bonfire and you would like to extinguish it, right? So the way to do that is bring in the tranquility, the concentration, the equanimity. That's what's going to calm the mind down. Where before we were trying to lift the mind up out of its sluggishness, so we practice enlightenment factor of investigation, energy, or joy. But now you'd like to bring in the tranquility, concentration, equanimity. And here it's the same way. The way that you arise these in the mind is through right effort. You're going to need to apply the effort to bring these into the mind. So I've taught these in Volume 1, Chapter 3. You can see what each one of these factors are. And I kind of summarize the words of the Buddha in there to help you understand how to use them. The thing that's going to allow you to either apply the enlightenment factor of investigation, energy, and joy, or the enlightenment factor of tranquility, concentration, equanimity is the mindfulness. That's why the Buddha says mindfulness is always useful. You should always be practicing mindfulness from the moment you first start waking up in the morning, all day long, until you're going to sleep at night. You need to be practicing awareness of the mind. And more specifically, those 4 foundations of mindfulness, because that's what's going to be able to alert you to the sluggish condition or the excited condition. Without the awareness of mind, you wouldn't be able to know whether your mind's sluggish or excited. So therefore, you wouldn't be able to bring in the appropriate factors of enlightenment. So that's why you're always practicing mindfulness. So any questions here on what these are or how to practice them or how to apply them, you can put it into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or you can raise your hand in Zoom if you'd like. Okay, looks like Marcy has a question here, and maybe Chris as well. Hello, Teacher David. If a being used the word hope, is this an indication of craving? Example, I'm hoping to see you. If yes, please share guidance that would be beneficial to help. So the word hope does elicit the word desire. If you look up the word hope, it's to have a desire about something. So you'll see that I don't use the word hope, right? That oftentimes in the past, before I knew these teachings, we might have used that. And that's kind of a common thing. We think that it's kind of polite, that we'll say, oh, I hope to see you later, or I hope to see you, or I hope you'll come to my party, or these kinds of things. And this is the mind craving. So what you'll notice is that the way that you speak is indicative of how the mind is functioning. So if you kind of purge that from your vocabulary, where you say, perhaps I'll see you later, or hey, I might see you later, or hey, it'd be great to see you later, right? These kinds of things, instead of this hoping, which has this longing, yearning in it. So you could actually eliminate that from your vocabulary and it'll help promote a mind of free of craving, desire, attachment. Chris is asking a question here. When I answer questions on this particular service, I don't even know how to pronounce it, although I know what that service is, I tend to experience energy. Does that mean it's beneficial to use this? if the mind is sluggish, to get it going again. This is something I'm starting to practice, and I'm wondering if it makes sense to confirm with you if it's wise or not. Thank you, sir. So you're not interested in relying on like a website in order to arise the enlightenment factor of energy, because that website is not permanent. And if your mind gets used to only being able to arise energy based on that website, then your mind is now attached. You're now dependent on that website. There's a craving there. So what you would like to do is get to the point where you can internally cultivate the enlightenment factor of energy, and you can arise it through your own right effort. That's what's going to help you to arise that enlightenment factor of energy. So if you rely on something like website, this would be the same thing as like taking caffeine, for example, and that's what's going to arise the energy in the mind. And you're not interested in your mind being dependent on these things, because then it's not liberated. You would like to be able to internally and inwardly arise that energy in the mind. Okay. I'm not seeing any other questions anywhere. So let's go to the next chapter, which is chapter 67. Is there someone who would like to read this? Okay, looks like Samantha was first there. We'll go with Samantha.
4 developments of concentration. Monks, there are these 4 developments of concentration. What 4? Number 1, there is a development of concentration that leads to residing peacefully in this very life. 2, there is a development of concentration that leads to obtaining wisdom and vision. 3, there is a development of concentration that leads to mindfulness and clear comprehension. 4, there is a development of concentration that leads to the destruction of the taints. 1, and what, monks, is the development of concentration that leads to residing peacefully in this very life? Here a monk, distant from sense desires, distant from unwholesome mental states, enters and resides in the first jhana, which is with thinking and pondering, based in seclusion, filled with excitement and joy. And with the subsiding of thinking and pondering, by gaining inner tranquility and oneness of mind, he enters and resides in the second jhana, which is without thinking and pondering, based in concentration, filled with excitement and joy. And with the fading away of excitement, remaining imperturbable, mindful and clearly aware, he experiences in himself the joy of which the noble ones say. Peaceful is he who resides with equanimity and mindfulness. He enters the third jhana, and having given up pleasure and pain, and with the fading away of former gladness and sadness, he enters and resides in the fourth jhana, which is beyond pleasure and pain, and purified by equanimity and mindfulness. This is called the development of concentration that leads to residing peacefully in this very life. 2, and what is the development of concentration that leads to obtaining wisdom and vision? Here a monk attends to the perception of light. He focuses on the perception of day thus: as by day, so at night; as at night, so by day. Thus, with a mind that is open and uncovered, he develops a mind permeating with brightness. This is the development of concentration that leads to obtaining wisdom and vision. 3, and what is the development of concentration that leads to mindfulness and clear comprehension? Here a monk knows feelings as they arise, and as they remain present, as they disappear. He knows perceptions as they arise, as they remain present, as they disappear. He knows thoughts as they arise, as they remain present, as they disappear. This is the development of concentration that leads to mindfulness and clear comprehension. 4, and what is the development of concentration that leads to the destruction of the taints? Here a monk resides reflecting on arising and vanishing and the 5 aggregates subject to clinging. Such is form, such its origin, such its passing away. Such is feeling, such its origin, such its passing away. Such is perception, such is its origin, such its passing away. Such are volitional formations, such its origin, such its passing away. Such is consciousness, such its origin, such its passing away. This is the development of concentration that leads to the destruction of the taints. These are the 4 developments of concentration.
Okay, thank you, Samantha. So here, you're going to need to get to the point where you're just always concentrated so that you can bring forth all your practice. Like right speech, you would need to be able to have concentration to be able to implement right speech. So there's this concentration that leads to peacefulness in this very life. There's concentration that leads to the obtaining of wisdom and vision. There's this concentration that leads to mindfulness and comprehension, and then there's concentration that leads to the destruction of the taints or the elimination of the fetters. That's what he's talking about. So this first one, he's talking about the development of concentration that leads to residing peacefully in this very life. And what he's talking about is if you've put together the Eightfold Path well, then you're going to start to experience the jhanas. These are the preliminary phases that the mind moves through. And I teach these at different times. So when your mind's moving through these jhanas, there's a heightened level of concentration that you experience. And then this is going to help the mind to be more peaceful and more joyful, because when your mind is discombobulated and it's hard to remember things, you're not going to be very peaceful in that situation. You're trying to remember things. You're trying to work really hard. You can't quite remember what you need to remember. That's not the way that you're interested in functioning in the world. You would like to function so that you have comprehension and you have this clear concentration. And that's what's going to help to promote peacefulness in the mind. Then the second one is concentration that leads to obtaining wisdom and vision. And what the Buddha is essentially talking about here is that it's important to keep the mind bright and uplifted, right? If you go into the store and you go to the cashier and it's like, yeah, I'm here to pay for my water here. Yeah. Right? Like this isn't going to lead to concentration because the mind is kind of dull and lethargic. You would like to keep the mind uplifted. You like to keep the mind bright, permeating with brightness. So when you go into the store, it's like, hi, good morning. How are you? I'm here to purchase some water, right? Or whatever it is that you say. It's your personality, your character. You say whatever you like to say, but you keep your mind uplifted and bright. You smile at people, you say hello to people, maybe good morning to people, right? You can say these kinds of things. So that's what's going to lead to obtaining wisdom and vision, because you can keep your mind uplifted and it can be concentrated all throughout the day. So you're going to be able to cultivate wisdom. And whenever the Buddha is talking about vision, he's talking about being able to see the natural laws very clearly, that you're awakened to true reality. So when you're getting wisdom, it's going to also help you to have this vision where you can clearly see the natural laws. And keeping your mind bright and uplifted is going to be able to help you to do that. Then number 3, he's talking about development of concentration that leads to mindfulness and clear comprehension. Remember, mindfulness is awareness of mind, and then the clear comprehension is the concentration and clearly comprehending and understanding things. You need to be able to get to the point where you have enough awareness of mind that you can see your discontent feelings arise. You can see them that they're remaining present, and you can see that they're disappearing. And that's where you're cutting those off, and you're trying to cut them off as a bodily sensation. But before you're able to do that, you're going to actually be able to experience these feelings. You're going to be able to see them arise, you're going to be able to see them stay there, and you're going to see them disappear, that they're impermanent. And not only the feelings, but your perceptions too. The feelings are the painful feelings, pleasant feelings, and neither painful nor pleasant. What your perceptions are your views and opinions about the world. You need to be able to see those arise, that they're consistently there, remaining present, and they're disappearing. Because you're going to eventually need to eliminate your clinging to any perceptions. But the first part of being able to eliminate your clinging to your perception is to be able to see them with mindfulness and clear comprehension. And then the Buddha says the same thing about your thoughts, that any thoughts that arise, you're going to need to see that they arise, they remain present, and then they disappear. And this is part of developing your mindfulness and clear comprehension. Then he talks about concentration that leads to the destruction of the taints, or the elimination of the 10 fetters. That's what you're ultimately working to do on this path to enlightenment, is eliminate the 10 fetters. And this is reflecting on the arising and vanishing of the 5 aggregates. The 5 aggregates are form, feeling, perception, volitional formations, which are choices and decisions, and then the consciousness itself. So you're going to need to be able to see the origin and understand the origin of the physical form, the passing away of it, meaning the impermanent nature of it, and then things like feelings. You're going to need to understand how they originate and then how they pass away. The same thing with your perceptions, your volitional formations, and the consciousness. And you're going to be able to learn this when you study dependent origination. When we get to chapter 14 in volume 5, you're going to learn about the origin and the passing away of these things and how they arise and they change. So you're going to need to develop that in order to be able to train your mind to eliminate the 10 fetters. So any questions on this here, the Buddha talking about concentration and the 4 types of concentration to develop? Okay, Vibhav, go ahead, sir.
Thank you. I guess my question was that all this development concentration, the first one is mostly at the time of doing the meditation. The other ones, it seems, are like you're doing it all throughout the day. It does not specifically when you're doing meditation, right? This is basically all throughout the day when you're...
Yeah, it's all through the day. That's one of the big misunderstandings about the jhanas, is that people think it's only in meditation. But by the time your mind is moving into the jhanas, your mind's going to reside in those mental states all throughout the day. Here you can see it if you get to the point where's the Buddha say it? Here it is. He enters and resides, right? He enters and resides. You can see that, and you'll be able to experience that too, that all these qualities of the jhanas, they're going to be sticking with you. Even as you're moving through the stages of enlightenment and your mind's actually enlightened, all these qualities that the Buddha is talking about here, the mind retains those. You have to retain them in order to get to enlightenment. So he's talking about entering and residing in the jhana. Some people think that you turn these jhanas on or off, or that you only experience them when you're in meditation, but this isn't actually true. These are phases that the mind goes through on your way to the first stage of enlightenment.
Thank you. And the 2, 3, and 4, they're also like, this is not throughout the day when you're doing things, you are looking at your feelings. Like I guess number 2 is talked about when you're interacting with people or you're doing things, you're doing it in a bright way, your mind is bright. Number 3 is when the feelings are rising, they're present and they're fading away. That is throughout the day when you are noticing these feelings. And same way for number 4, where you are looking at the 5 aggregates. This is throughout the day. This is not necessarily at the time of meditation too, right?
Exactly. And this is what you're doing, is you're moving to this higher consciousness where your mind is functioning differently. Where in the unenlightened state, when we don't know about this path, it's just like ho-hum, I got to go to work, I got to get out of bed, I got to have some food, I got to take a shower, I got to get to work, right? Like this is the way the mind might be when it's unenlightened and it doesn't understand these teachings. But what the Buddha is teaching you here is how to brighten up the mind and get to this radiance and brightness, this higher consciousness where your mind's aware. You have this relaxed and calm state, but yet there's attentiveness and alertness in the mind. The mind's crisp, it's bright, right? It's always crisp, it's always bright, that you don't have this lethargic state, but you also don't have this excited state where you're in this excited state, right? So your mind is in the middle where it's relaxed and calm, but it's attentive, it's bright, it's sharp, it's radiant, and that's what you're ultimately working to get to.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, let me see. We have some questions perhaps here. Let me see. Yes, we have some questions here. Teacher David, what did Gotama Buddha mean when he said something along the lines of as by day, so by night? That's where he's talking about like all day long, like Vibhav was just talking about. Like you need to be practicing this all day long where your mind is bright and uplifted. And you're welcome, Marcy. Pleased to help you. Okay, so let's move on to the next chapter. So chapter 68. Is there someone who would like to read this? This is Develop Concentration First Discourse. Okay, Vibhav, go ahead, sir.
Develop concentration, first discourse. Monks, develop concentration. A monk who is concentrated understands things as they really are And what does he understand that really is? He understands as really is. This is discontentedness. He understands as it really is. This is the cause of discontentedness. He understands that it really is. This is the elimination of discontentedness. He understands that it really is. This is the way leading to the elimination of discontentedness. Monks develop concentration. A monk who is concentrated understands things as they really are. Therefore, monks, an effort should be made to understand this is discontentedness. An effort should be made to understand this is the cause of discontentedness. An effort should be made to understand this is the elimination of discontentedness. An effort should be made to understand this is the way leading to the elimination of discontentedness.
Okay, thank you, Vibhav. So in order to get to concentration in your mind, you're going to need to clear out the pollutions of the mind, those 10 fetters. More and more as you're clearing out that pollution, that's where the concentration and the focus and the clarity is going to start shining through the mind. Well, the first thing you need to do in order to clear out your pollution is understand the Four Noble Truths. So that's why the Buddha is saying, okay, if you would like to develop this concentration, then you need to understand things as they really are. You're going to need to understand the Four Noble Truths. This is discontentedness, the cause, the elimination, and the way leading to the elimination of discontentedness. This isn't the Four Noble Truths themselves, but this is just a reference to them. So you would need to be able to understand these Four Noble Truths in detail, the way that I teach them, in order to be able to get to concentration. If you don't understand what's causing the discontent feelings, you'll never be able to get to concentration, because the mind being angry and sad and feeling like you miss people and you're lonely and you're bored or you're frustrated, that's going to inhibit concentration. So by understanding the Four Noble Truths, you can have this breakthrough to be able to understand what's causing these discontent feelings, so you can clear out some of the pollution and ultimately get to concentration. So let me know what questions you guys have here. You can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom. Looks like Marcy has a question. Go ahead, Marcy. Or maybe you'd like to read.
Thank you, Teacher David. It's lovely to see everyone. Teacher David, on the previous chapter, you were talking about, is it normal for someone, like, there's days, I shouldn't say there's days, there's been more days than not where I wake up in the morning and I have such a serene peacefulness. I'm sitting here saying to myself, is this really my life now? Is my life this enjoyable now? Like, I question, I'm like, and then I think, and I'm like, wow, like, it's really this enjoyable.
Mm-hmm.
But is it normal to do that, to question that as you're going along here and practicing this?
Yeah, one of the things that you need to be able to do is get used to this new mind, right? Because we're used to being angry and disgruntled and irritable and feeling down and lethargic. And this mind being uplifted all the time like this, it kind of feels strange. It kind of feels weird. It's kind of like getting a new pair of clothes and you got to get used to wearing these new pair of shoes or these new pair of clothes, right? You don't quite feel comfortable when you first put on that new pair of shoes or that new set of clothes. And it's the same kind of thing, is that as this mind is brightening up and you're getting closer and closer to enlightenment, you can't even fathom how peaceful and how joyful and how serene the mind actually is. And you kind of got to get used to that this is the way the mind's going to be from now on. And in whatever you're experiencing now, you're not enlightened yet. It's only going to get better from this point forward. That we talked about the 7 factors of enlightenment are so helpful, because when you're starting to experience these heightened qualities, and you're talking about serenity, when you're starting to experience that, the mind can get into this excited state, like, oh my goodness, is this the way my life is now? Are you serious? This is the way it's going to be, right? Like, the mind can get in this excited state, and you got to calm it down, and you got to be sure that you come to the middle way and realize, like, yes, this is the way the mind is. It's going to be uplifted. It's going to be bright. It's going to be sharp, but you need to be able to still restrain the mind and not allow it to get into this excited state, but also don't allow it to get into this lethargic state. Because if you allow the mind to get into that excited state, that means it's going to swing to the other side. It's this pendulum, and you're trying to get the pendulum to be steady and stable and still in the middle. But then you can still enjoy that quality of serenity and calmness and that joy that's in the middle.
So when I do say to my mind, and I sit there and I say, Marcy, you are practicing the Buddha's teachings. This is something that is expected. This is normal. And then I try to bring myself back to the middle. That's what I should be doing. Because sometimes when I wake up, I'm waking up with this extraordinary amount of energy, and just like this, I just feel so light. I could feel myself getting excited, but then I'll lay in bed and I'll be like, all right, Marcy, you gotta kind of like, let's bring it to the middle. So that's the best way to handle a situation like that.
Yeah.
All right.
You got to
Thank you.
you got to temper the mind, and the mind's got to be disciplined. The mind's going to be bright and uplifted internally, but externally you need to know how to kind of maintain your stability of your mind, because otherwise it's going to unravel on you. So you need to be able to maintain that calmness and composure in these situations, that equanimity.
Yeah. I mean, I just lived in darkness for so long and had so much just darkness, like, suicide was always on the top of my head. I, was eating unhealthy. I was a hobbit hiding in my house. And I reflect back on those days and I can't imagine ever existing like that ever again. So the elation that I get is I can see that my mind gets very excited about the difference. And, so that heightened stuff, I'm trying to learn how to kind of make sure I stay balanced. But Teacher David, it's an absolutely amazing experience. I can't explain. I hope, I shouldn't say hope because we just learned about that. That's a desire, that's a craving. But I truly wish the well-being for all beings. This is absolutely life-changing. It is amazing, and I'm very grateful for coming upon you. Thank you.
Yeah, you've been practicing for a while, Marcy, and the teachings of the Buddha lead exactly where he said they do, right? You can see the truth for yourself. So you're just going to need to temper the mind and try to maintain your calmness and composure, and also be sure that conceit doesn't creep in there, because sometimes the arrogance and the pride and the boastfulness will come in there, and you need to be able to temper that and make sure you get rid of that, because what you're looking to get to is complete liberation and full liberation. And you won't be able to do that if you allow the mind to get to excitement, or if you allow the mind to have this conceitedness and this boastfulness and arrogance that comes in.
Agreed. Yeah. And I actually do see that, because people ask me like, hey, Marcy, how are you? And I'm like, life is most enjoyable. Life is great, but I can feel that like, and I know that like, it's kind of hard to find that balance of not being like overly boastful about it. But I do find the mind is so, I don't even want to know how the word you use, of like shocked that it's this peaceful, that I do find myself that I'm like, yeah, life is absolutely amazing. I saw this woman in the store and she's like, are you serious? And I was like, yes, life is most enjoyable. And then I could feel that trying to convince her coming out in me, and but again, it's a practice. You
got to get used to your new shoes, Marcy.
Very true. And I don't mind reading if no one else has to read. I will read next if that's okay.
Okay, yeah, you can go ahead and read since you haven't read yet.
All right. Develop concentration. Monks, develop concentration. A monk who is concentrated understands things as they really are. And what does he understand as it really is? The origin, the passing away of form, the origin, the passing away of feeling, the origin, the passing away of perception, the origin, and passing away of volitional formation, choices, decision, the origin and the passing away of consciousness. And what, monks, is the origin of form? What is the origin of feeling? What is the origin of perception? What is the origin of volitional formation, choices, decision? What is the origin of consciousness? Here, monks, one seeks excitement, one welcomes, one remains holding. And what is it that one seeks excitement in? What does one welcome? To what does one remain holding? One seeks excitement in form, welcomes it, and remains holding on to it. As a consequence of this, excitement arises. Excitement in the form of clinging, with one's clinging as condition. Exists, comes to be. With existence as condition, birth. With birth as condition, aging and death, sorrow, grief, pain, displeasure, despair, come to be. Such is the origin of this whole mass of discontentedness. One seeks excitement in feeling, welcomes it, and remains holding to it. As a consequence of this, excitement arises. Excitement in feeling is clinging. With one's clinging as condition, existence comes to be. With existence and as condition, birth. With birth as condition, aging and death, sorrow, grief, pain, displeasure, and despair come to be. Such is the origin of this whole mass of discontentedness. One seeks excitement in perception, welcomes it, and remains holding to it. As a consequence of this, excitement arises. Excitement in perception is clinging. With one's clinging as condition, existence comes to be. With existence as condition, birth. With birth as condition, aging and death, sorrow, grief, pain, displeasure, and despair come to be. Such is the origin of this whole mass of discontentedness. One seeks excitement in volitional formations, choices, decision, welcomes it, and remains holding to it. As a consequence of this, excitement arises. Excitement in volitional formation is clinging. With one's clinging as condition, existence comes to be. With existence as condition, birth. With birth as condition, aging and death, sorrow, grief, pain, displeasure, and despair come to be. Such is the origin of this whole mass of discontentedness. One seeks excitement in consciousness, welcomes it, and remains holding to it. As a consequence of this, excitement in consciousness is clinging. With one's clinging as condition, existence comes to be. With existence as condition, birth. With birth as condition, aging and death, sorrow, grief, pain, displeasure, and despair come to be. Such is the origin of this whole mass of discontentedness. This, monks, is the origin of form. This is the origin of feeling. This is the origin of perception. This is the origin of volitional formations. This is the origin of consciousness. And what, monks, is the passing away of form? What is the passing away of feeling? What is the passing away of perception? What is the passing away of volitional formations, choices, decision? What is the passing away of consciousness? Here, monks, one does not seek excitement. One does not welcome. One does not remain holding. And what is that one does not seek excitement in? What doesn't one welcome? And what doesn't one remain holding? One does not seek excitement in form, does not welcome it, does not remain holding to it. As a consequence of this, excitement is eliminated. Excitement in form is eliminated. With the elimination of excitement comes elimination of clinging. With the elimination of clinging comes the elimination of existence. With the elimination of existence comes elimination of birth. With the elimination of birth comes elimination of aging and death, sorrow, grief, pain, displeasure, and despair, such as the elimination of this whole mass of discontentedness. One does not seek excitement in feeling, does not welcome it, does not remain holding to it. As a consequence of this, excitement and feeling with the elimination of excitement comes elimination of clinging. With the elimination of clinging elimination of existence. With the elimination of existence comes elimination of birth. With the elimination of birth comes elimination of aging and death, sorrow, grief, pain, displeasure, and despair, such as the elimination of this whole mass of discontentedness.
We can skip over
One does
these,
not see-
Marcy.
Okay.
If you like, you can just read this first sentence because that's the only thing that's different.
You got it. One does not seek excitement in perception, does not welcome it, does not remain holding to it. One does not seek excitement in volitional formation, choices, decision, does not welcome it, does not remain holding to it. One does not seek excitement in consciousness, does not welcome it, does not remain holding to it. With the elimination of excitement comes elimination of clinging. With the elimination of clinging, elimination of existence. With the elimination of existence comes elimination of birth. With the elimination of birth comes elimination of aging and death, sorrow, grief, pain, displeasure, and despair. Such is the elimination of the whole mass of discontentedness. This, monks, is the passing away of form. This is the passing away of feeling. This is the passing away of perception. This is the passing away of volitional formations, choices, decisions. This is the passing away of consciousness.
Okay, thank you, Marcy. This is the perfect discourse for you. This is where
Right.
the Buddha is explaining to you, don't welcome and invite in that excitement. What he's talking about here is the conditional excitement. Based on the condition that my mind is peaceful, I'm going to get excited. Well, that's still a conditional feeling. You're going to need to let that go, because as long as you're clinging to that peacefulness and that serenity, that is not permanent yet. And if you're allowing the mind to get excited about that, then it's going to basically end up in the painful feelings at some point. You've got painful feelings coming your way. You're not done yet, because as long as your mind's getting to this excitement, it's got to swing to the other side, and it's going to experience the other side. So you've got to eliminate that craving, that clinging that the mind is experiencing, because it's welcoming in this excitement. It's having this craving, this desire for this serenity. And when you're having that serenity based on that condition, the mind is now getting to this excitement. So that serenity is not permanent yet. So your mind's going to swing to the other side. So that's what the Buddha is explaining here, is to not cling to any of these things: the form, the feelings, the perceptions, the volitional formations, or the consciousness. And by doing so, that's what's going to actually get the mind to liberation. So any questions on this one? Okay, Marcy, go ahead.
And I just want to, just for clarity for the mind, he's speaking about the 5 aggregates here, right? He incorporates the 5 aggregates: the forms, feelings, perceptions, volitional formation, and consciousness.
Yeah, and what your mind is doing is you're clinging to the consciousness. You're experiencing certain qualities of the consciousness. And now because of that, you're getting this excitement. And you would like to not cling to that consciousness, realizing that what you're experiencing right now is impermanent. It's kind of like you need to be able to get to the point where you see those qualities of enlightenment starting to shine through. You're like, I see you over there. I see what you're doing there. You're getting peaceful, aren't you? Okay. You just kind of notice it. You just kind of observe it, but you don't get excited about it, right? Because that's what's going to lead to the decrease of that. Whereas if you can just be like, okay, I see what you're doing. You're getting nice and peaceful. You're getting nice and joyful. Okay, I dig that. Yeah, okay, let's keep going with that. Right? So you'd like to just kind of observe it, know that it's there. Don't welcome in the excitement, because that excitement's a conditioned feeling based on the craving, the desire of holding on and clinging to this consciousness.
Thank you, Teacher David.
You're welcome. All right, so let me see if we have any questions anywhere else. Okay, let's see. I don't see any questions anywhere else. So let's go to the last one for today, which is chapter 70. Is there someone who would like to read this? A very short chapter. Okay, looks like Pat's going to read that one. Go ahead, sir.
The first jhana is secure from danger and Mara. So too, monks, when distant from sense desires, distant from unwholesome mental states, enters and resides in the first jhana, which is with thinking and pondering, based in seclusion, filled with excitement and joy. On that occasion, it occurs to the monk, now I am secure from danger, and Mara cannot do anything to me. It also occurs to Mara, the evil one, now the monk is secure against danger, and I cannot do anything to him. In reference to the second jhana, the third jhana, and the fourth jhana are explained in the same repetitive phrases.
Okay, thank you, Pat. So here what the Buddha is explaining is once your mind enters into the first jhana, that this being Mara is no longer going to be able to access you and try to influence you. It's going to actually lose interest in you. This being Mara is a formless being that is interested in causing calamity in the world. It's a real, actual being, and it will try to influence you to do unwholesome things, as well as beings operating on this being's behalf. That there are certain beings in the world that are interested in seeing only calamity and harm in the world. Not only do you have that coming from the hell realm and the afflicted spirit realm, but you even have that coming from the human realm. There are certain human beings that are functioning like hell beings or afflicted spirits, and they're going to try to influence you to do unwise and unwholesome things. And it's your wisdom that's going to keep you secure from that danger. So by the time your mind enters into the first jhana, you're secure from Mara trying to influence you. But the first jhana is not a permanent mental state. If you become complacent at anywhere in the jhanas, first, second, third, or fourth jhana, your mind can actually regress and you can move out of the jhanas. So getting into the jhanas, while this is helpful and it's beneficial, and this is something that you would like to acquire, you can't get complacent in those jhanas. That's why the Buddha was teaching you today about how to remain dedicated and determined and diligent, that you need to keep on moving through and get to that first stage of enlightenment. From there, your mind won't regress backwards. You'll just continue to make forward progress from there. But in the jhanas, your mind is still susceptible to any of the regression, that if you're in those jhanas, your mind can potentially become complacent and regress out of there. So getting into the jhanas, while that's wonderful that you're secure from the danger of Mara and beings operating on Mara's behalf, you can't get complacent, because if you regress out of there, your mind's going to actually be susceptible to these beings again. So getting to that first stage of enlightenment is where you would ultimately like to get to that, and then beyond that, of course, which is actual enlightenment, when you get to the fourth stage of enlightenment, and that's where your mind will be completely liberated. So any questions on this particular discourse, you can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions anywhere. So what I'm going to do is just end by thanking you guys for reading. Thank you guys for asking questions. Thank you for your dedication and diligence to learning and practicing these teachings. Next week, we're going to be moving into the next 10 chapters, which is chapters 71 through 80. That's where you're going to be learning the next set of chapters, and we're going to be exploring that in volume 3. For those of you guys that are online, I have the picture for volume 2 on the screen. It's actually volume 3 that we're studying. So you're going to need to be able to download that or get a printed version of that through printing it yourself, getting printed versions at the temple, or ordering them on Amazon so that you can read the actual chapters. That's going to help you because you can see the words of the Buddha, you can see the reference, you can see the words that I'm sharing with you to help you dive deeper into this. Next Saturday, that's what we're going to be doing. Tomorrow in our group learning program, we're going to be in the frequently asked questions section of volume 1. There's 11 frequently asked questions at the back of the book, and that's what I'm going to be teaching tomorrow in the group learning program. So you're welcome to attend that. Monday through Friday this week, I'm going to be teaching the Foundation and the Path to Enlightenment course. So if anybody would like to attend that, either here in Chiang Mai or online, because we live stream it, and it's also available through Zoom, you can attend that way as well. So thank you all for joining. And if you have any questions or anything you need me for, feel free to reach out. I'm back in Chiang Mai. Everything's nice and stable, internet connections, travel, all these kinds of things. I don't have to be going around the planet so much. So we'll be having classes consistently like I always do. So thank you guys for understanding during that impermanence where I wasn't able to teach all the classes. But you guys understand impermanence by now. Your teacher is impermanent. These classes are impermanent. But now you're going to see some consistency with the classes again. So thank you guys for understanding that. And perhaps I'll see you guys in a future class. Be well and take care. Sawadee krap.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. To provide support for this podcast, visit patreon.com/support Buddha. To access more teachings, visit buddhadailywisdom.com. There, you will discover a full range of courses, retreats, and online resources to assist you on the path to enlightenment. Remember to establish a daily, consistent meditation practice, along with learning and practicing these teachings. A well-developed meditation practice is the foundation in which to train the mind to attain enlightenment.